An entrepreneur returned home unexpectedly and was shocked to see what the housekeeper was doing with his twins. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Return. The sound of the engine of the Porsche Cayenne echoed softly through the underground garage of the mansion in Beverly Hills. Richard Anderson turned off the car and remained for a few seconds in the silence of the beige leather cabin, watching the red numbers of the digital clock, 2:47 p.m. He should have been arriving just at the end of the afternoon, but the meeting with the suppliers from Los Angeles had ended earlier than expected. At 42 years old, Richard was the kind of man who controlled every minute of his schedule with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Owner of Electro USA, a chain of 17 appliance stores spread across greater Los Angeles, he had built his empire through iron discipline and constant distrust. He climbed the stairs of the garage, carrying the Italian leather briefcase and the folder with contracts. The house was strangely silent, or at least that's what he expected. Since Patricia had moved to Miami 6 months ago, taking only her jewelry and leaving the twins behind, the 600-square-meter mansion felt too big, too cold. The 5 years of a turbulent marriage had ended in a legal battle that still echoed in the halls of downtown. Richard was a tall man, 6'1", with grey hair at the temples that he always kept impeccably cut. His brown eyes, usually as hard as the numbers on a spreadsheet, carried a sadness he hid behind Ralph Lauren suits and silk ties. That March afternoon, he wore a navy blue suit that cost more than the annual salary of many Americans. As he passed through the living room, decorated by his ex-wife with minimalist Danish furniture and contemporary artworks that had cost a small fortune, he noticed something unusual. Sounds coming from the second floor, low voices, muffled laughter. He frowned. The nanny had been dismissed the previous week after being caught sleeping on the job, and he had given the new housekeeper the day off, or at least he thought he had. "Heavenly Father, help me make this doll stand up," was the voice of Peter, one of the twins. "Calm down, my angel. Let's try again. Look, Daddy Doll wants to stand up," replied a female voice with a northeastern accent, mixing English and Spanish in a way he had never heard before. Richard ascended the Carrara marble stairs, stepping only on the edges of the steps to avoid making noise. His business mind was already formulating hypotheses: invasion, kidnapping, employee acting inappropriately. He was not a man to tolerate misconduct. At Electro USA, an employee caught out of their role was fired for cause on the spot. The corridor on the second floor was long, with reclaimed wood flooring that Patricia had insisted on importing from the heart of California. The walls were adorned with black and white photographs of old Los Angeles, an attempt to create a sophisticated air that always sounded artificial to Richard. He approached the ajar door of the children's room, his heart racing not from the adrenaline of fear, but from an anxiety he could not name. Through the crack of the door, he saw a scene that left him paralyzed. Sitting on the floor of the room, on the teddy bear rug that Peter and Paul had received as a Christmas gift, was Maria Smith, the housekeeper hired 3 months ago through a domestic worker agency in Santa Monica. But she was not cleaning. She was playing. Maria was about 35 years old, short, 5'1", with wavy black hair tied in a simple ponytail. She wore the light blue uniform that Richard required of all employees, a long-sleeve blouse and a knee-length skirt. But there was something different about her posture. She smiled in a way that lit up her entire face, revealing white, perfect teeth that contrasted with her sun-kissed skin. "Peter, Paul, now let's teach the doll to speak English," Maria said, manipulating an American Girl doll that had belonged to the time when Patricia still pretended to be interested in the children. "What's your name, beautiful doll?" "My name is Paul, the shyest of the twins, hesitated. "You can speak in Spanish first, my love. What's her name?" "Her name is Star." "What a lovely name. So, my name is Star. Repeat after me, my name is Izzy." The children repeated in chorus, laughing when they mispronounced. Richard watched his children, really watched, for the first time in months. Peter, with his blonde hair like his mother's, gestured animatedly explaining something about the doll's dress. Paul, dark-haired like his father, but with green eyes inherited from their paternal grandmother, was focused on trying to pronounce the words in English. They seemed happy, genuinely happy. In recent months, since Patricia's stormy departure, the children had become quiet, almost ghostly. They spent hours on their video games or watching cartoons on Hulu, responding to his questions with polite monosyllables. "Yes, Dad." "No, Dad." "I don't know, Dad." Meals were silent, punctuated only by the clatter of cutlery against fine china. "Aunt Maria, tell us again the story of the boy who became a star," Peter asked, throwing himself into her lap with a naturalness that made Richard's chest tighten. "Oh, my angel, you've already heard that story 3 times today." "But we like it, and you tell it better than Hulu." Maria laughed, a crystal-clear sound that echoed through the room. "Okay, but this time in English. How about, once upon a time, a very brave boy who lived in a town far away from here," as she began the narrative, mixing English and Spanish in a natural melody. Richard noticed details he had ignored during months of superficial interaction with the staff member. The way she looked into the children's eyes when she spoke. How her hands gestured expressively, bringing the story to life. How Peter and Paul approached her naturally, without the respectful fear they showed towards him. On the coffee table in the room, there were sheets of paper with colourful drawings. Richard could see, even from a distance, simple yet vibrant strokes. A house with smoke coming from the chimney, 2 children holding hands, a woman smiling. In the corner of each, drawing, in the neat handwriting of someone who learned to write through repetition, it said, "For Dad, with love." When was the last time his children had drawn something for him? When was the last time he had sat on the floor to play with them? The questions hammered in his mind as he watched Maria transform dolls and toy cars into characters of an epic story about friendship and courage. "Now let's organize the toys while singing that song I taught you," said Maria, getting up with agility. "Who remembers the cleanup song?" I do," shouted the boys in unison. And then they began to sing, in a simple melody that Maria had clearly invented. "Everything in its place, everything in its place, let's all help to organize the house." Richard saw his children, kids who had been raised to have maids do everything for them, enthusiastically putting away toys, turning a household chore into play. Peter carried a box of Legos, singing at the top of his lungs, while Paul carefully folded doll clothes, laughing at his own clumsy attempts. In less than 15 minutes, the room was organized, but instead of sending the kids away, Maria sat on the bed and clapped her hands twice. "Now, my little angels, it's time for a special snack." "What special snack?" asked Paul, his eyes shining with curiosity. "Oh, did you forget? Today is Friday. Friday is quesadilla day that Auntie brought all the way from Texas." Richard frowned. Quesadilla? The children had been raised on imported products and organic food bought from expensive markets in Santa Monica. Patricia had hired a French nutritionist to create weekly menus that cost more than a minimum wage. But Peter and Paul jumped off the bed as if they had won the lottery. Let's go, and you will tell more stories about your town." As they ran down towards the kitchen, Maria followed them with a maternal smile that Richard had never seen Patricia show. Before leaving the room, she turned around and quickly tidied the bed pillows, smoothed the blanket, and turned off the light, leaving everything immaculate. Richard stood in the hallway for long minutes, processing what he had witnessed. Part of him, the controlling, business-oriented part, wanted to go downstairs immediately and reprimand the staff member for playing during work hours. But another part, a part he had buried under years of responsibilities and financial pressures, was curious to see what would happen in the kitchen. He cautiously descended the stairs, guided by the sound of laughter coming from the 50-square-foot American kitchen that Patricia had designed to impress guests, but where she rarely cooked herself. What he saw when he reached the kitchen door would change his life forever. Continue 1630, Chapter 2. The Discovery in the Kitchen. The kitchen of the Anderson mansion had been designed by renowned interior designer Marcia Taylor to be a functional work of art. Some Gabriel marble countertops, imported Miele appliances from Germany, a central island with a professional cooktop, and a climate-controlled wine cellar for 300 bottles. All of this had cost over $200,000 and had appeared in 3 decorating magazines. Patricia loved to show off the kitchen to her friends, even though her greatest culinary achievement was heating frozen croissants in the oven. But at that moment, watching through the ajar door, Richard saw his museum-like kitchen transformed into something completely different. Maria had laid a checkered dish towel over the marble island, creating a cozy and homey atmosphere. In a $500 non-stick frying pan, she was preparing quesadillas with the skill of someone who had done it thousands of times. "Peter, sweetheart, go over to the fridge and grab the cheese wrapped in aluminum foil," Maria instructed, stirring the quesadilla batter with precise circular movements. "And be careful not to drop anything, my angel." Peter obeyed with an enthusiasm that surprised his father. Normally, any request for help with household chores was met with complaints and negotiations. The children had been raised to be served, not to serve. "Aunt Maria, can I stir too?" Paul approached the frying pan, stretching his neck to see the process. "Of course, my love. But first wash your little hands really well. Go to the sink, use the soap, and count to 20 while you scrub. Just like we do." An elephant bothered a lot of people. Paul began to sing the children's song while washing his hands, and Peter joined in from a distance. "Two elephants bother much more." Richard vaguely remembered teaching this song to the boys when they were babies, but it felt like a lifetime ago. In recent years, interactions with his children had been limited to checking report cards, authorizing extra expenses, and attending mandatory parent meetings at St. Patrick's School, the bilingual private school they attended. "Now that's it! Clean hands, happy cook." Maria set up a stool for Paul to reach the countertop. "Let's do it this way. I'll hold the frying pan, and you will spread the batter very slowly. It has to be like you're painting a picture on the bottom of the frying pan." Paul held the wooden spoon with the seriousness of a surgeon. His tongue peeked out from the corner of his mouth. Extreme concentration signal that Richard knew well. The boy made the same face when he was drawing or building with Lego. "Like this, Aunt Mary." "Perfect, my artist. Now Paul is going to sprinkle the cheese on top. It has to be like snow falling on the roof." Paul took the cheese that Mary had grated earlier. When had she done that, Richard wondered, and began to distribute it over the dough with exaggerated care. "Too much cheese ruins it. Too little makes it bland," Mary instructed. "You have to find the right balance. Life is like that too, folks. Everything needs to be just right." While the quesadilla was browning in the pan, Mary took the opportunity to wash the dishes they had used. But instead of just cleaning, she turned even that into a game. "Who can tell me how many plates we have here?" she asked, stacking the small plates. "4," shouted Paul. "That's right. And if each plate were a school friend, how many friends would you have?" "4 friends," replied Peter, clapping his hands. "And if 2 more plates of friends arrived, how many would there be?" The boys took a few seconds to think, counting on their fingers. "6," they said in unison. "Congratulations, you..." are mathematicians. Mary flipped the quesadilla with an elegant motion. Math is everywhere, in the kitchen, in play, in music. Richard watched, fascinated. Mary was teaching basic math, English, motor skills, and household responsibility all at once, naturally and enjoyably. At St. Patrick's School, the boys had tutoring sessions 3 times a week with private teachers who charged $200 an hour. But he had never seen the kids so engaged in learning as they were at that moment. The quesadilla was ready, and Mary cut it into perfect triangular pieces, serving them on colorful plates that Richard didn't even know existed in the house. Now let's eat in the backyard. Good food has to be eaten outdoors, enjoying the sun that God sent. The 3 of them went out through the kitchen door that led to the backyard garden. Richard followed them to the living room, where he had a privileged view of the outdoor area through the tempered glass windows. The mansion's backyard was another expensive landscaping project. Imported Korean grass, royal palms, a teak wood deck with an infinity pool, and a Portuguese iron gazebo where Patricia used to have tea with her high society friends. Everything was very beautiful, very perfect, very empty. But Mary had transformed the space. She spread a striped blanket on the deck, creating an improvised picnic. The boys sat around her like Indians around a campfire, devouring the quesadilla and asking questions about everything. "Aunt Mary, is your city very far from here?" asked Paul, licking his cheese-covered fingers. "Very far, my angel. You have to fly for almost 3 hours. There in Springfield, where I was born, there's a lot of sun, a lot of green, and the people are different from those in Los Angeles." "Different how?" Peter leaned closer to her. "There, everyone knows each other. When we pass on the street, we say, 'Good afternoon,' even if we don't know the person. And when it rains, everyone is happy, because the rain there is a blessing. It's not like here in Los Angeles, where rain only brings problems." "Are there kids like us there?" Mary smiled with a melancholy that Richard could sense even from a distance. "Yes, my dear. There's a very special little girl who lives with her grandmother because her mommy had to come to Los Angeles to work." "Is the girl sad?" Paul frowned with genuine concern. "Sometimes she is, yes, but she understands that her mommy is working to give her a better life. And every week they talk on the phone, and her mommy sends letters full of drawings and kisses." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. There was something in Mary's voice, a controlled pain he recognized. It was the pain of someone making silent sacrifices for love. "Do you miss your city, Aunt Mary?" Paul gently placed his small hand on her arm in a spontaneous gesture of affection. "I do, my love. But do you know what? I discovered we can carry our city in our hearts, and when we really like the people around us, any place becomes home." At that moment, Peter stood up and hugged Mary tightly. "Then we will love you a lot, so you won't miss it anymore." Paul joined the hug, and the 3 of them stayed like that, huddled together on the expensive wooden deck under the afternoon sun of Los Angeles. Richard had to step away from the window because he felt his eyes welling up. When was the last time he had hugged his children like that? When was the last time someone had hugged him like that? He returned to the kitchen and served himself a coffee from the $15,000 Italian machine, trying to process what he was feeling. Anger, confusion, admiration. It was a strange mix of emotions he couldn't name. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Mauricio Silvera, his majority partner. "Richard, we need to talk. Electro South cancelled the refrigerator order. They said there are problems at the factory and they won't be able to deliver in time for Mother's Day." Richard's stomach dropped. Electro South was responsible for 40% of the stock for the most important season of the year for the home appliance retail. "What do you mean they cancelled? We have a contract." "Well, it seems they are having serious financial problems. I heard they are going to file for bankruptcy next week." While he talked on the phone about the looming crisis, Richard looked out the window at the three still in the backyard. Mary had started teaching the boys how to make bracelets with flowers she had picked from the garden. Peter and Paul were focused, trying to imitate her delicate movements. "Richard, are you listening to me?" Mauricio's voice brought him back to the business reality. "Sorry, Mauricio, I'm dealing with another problem here." At home, it was a lie. For the first time in months, his home was not a problem. Continue 1631, Chapter 3. Invisible Signs. The following days passed like a movie in slow motion for Richard. The crisis with Electro South demanded his constant attention. Emergency meetings with lawyers, frantic calls to alternative suppliers, endless spreadsheets of calculated losses. But for the first time in his business career, Richard found himself torn between the numbers that didn't add up and a growing curiosity about what was happening in his own home. The following Monday, he woke up at 5:30 as usual, but instead of rushing straight to the office, he decided to have coffee in the kitchen instead of just grabbing an espresso for the car. He wanted to observe the morning routine of the kids, something he hadn't done in months. Mary arrived promptly at 7, as always. Richard heard the key turning in the service entrance lock, and soon after the soft sound of footsteps on the kitchen floor. He was hidden in the dining room, behind the wall that separated the spaces, sipping his coffee and pretending to read emails on his phone. "Good morning, my little angels," Mary's cheerful voice echoed through the house. "Where are my little sleepyheads?" The sound of slippers rushing down the stairs, laughter, the noise of chairs being dragged. Richard peeked through the crack in the door and saw his children still in pajamas, throwing themselves into Mary's arms as if they hadn't seen her in weeks. "Aunt Mary, I dreamed you turned into a fairy," shouted Peter, hanging onto her neck. "And I dreamed we lived in a tree house," added Paul. "What beautiful dreams! But before I turn into a fairy, this one needs to prepare breakfast for two very special princes." Mary opened the fridge and began to gather ingredients. "Today is American Pancake Day. Who wants to help?" For the next hour, Richard watched a spectacle of efficiency disguised as play. While making animal-shaped pancakes, Mary reviewed the boys' homework, tested their English vocabulary they had learned at school, and even managed to get them to take a bath and get dressed without a single complaint. "Peter, do you remember what the capital of France is?" she asked while flipping a pancake shaped like an elephant. "Paris," replied the boy proudly. "And Paul, how do you say good morning in English?" "Good morning." "Perfect. Now tell me, did you brush your teeth properly? I'll have to do an inspection." The boys opened exaggerated smiles for Mary to check their brushing. She made a serious, comical approval face. "Approved! Teeth shining brighter than diamonds." At 8:15, the school driver honked the horn. Mary had managed to get two notoriously slow children ready 15 minutes ahead of schedule, well-fed and in good spirits. "Bye, Aunt Mary. Don't forget to prepare a surprise for when we come back," shouted Peter, running to the car. "Surprise? What surprise?" laughed Mary. "You always have surprises," replied Paul, waving from the car window. When the sound of the engine faded away, the house fell silent. Richard waited a few minutes before revealing himself, curious to see what Mary would do when she thought she was alone. She didn't know he was home. Normally, at this hour, Richard would already be stuck in traffic on the freeway, talking on the phone with suppliers while trying to reach the office downtown. But that morning, he had cancelled the first meeting to observe. Mary returned to the kitchen and, instead of simply washing the dishes, began to clean each utensil with special care, putting everything in its exact place. Then, she opened a spiral notebook she took from her bag and started writing something. Richard couldn't resist. He cleared his throat loudly and entered the kitchen as if he had just come down for coffee. "Oh, Mr. Richard, I didn't know you were still home." Mary quickly tucked the notebook into her bag, looking embarrassed. Sorry, I thought you had left early as always. I have a meeting later today. I thought I'd work a bit from home. Richard poured more coffee for himself, trying to appear casual. The kids already went to school. Yes, sir. They left very excited today. Peter is looking forward to the science presentation on Friday, and Paul managed to read 3 pages by himself last night. There was genuine pride in her voice when she spoke about the kids' progress. Richard realized he knew more about his children's school life through 30 seconds of conversation with Mary than through months of reports from the school. What was that notebook? You were writing in? He asked, trying to sound uninterested. Mary hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Oh, it's nothing important, Mr. Richard. Just some notes. Notes about what? It's just that, well, Mary nervously fiddled with the hem of her uniform. I make some notes about the boys, how they sleep, if they eat well, what they like, what they don't like. I know it's not my job, but I thought it could be useful. Richard felt a mix of curiosity and irritation. Can I see? Mary's embarrassment was evident. You won't get mad. Why would I get mad? Reluctantly, Mary took the notebook out of her bag. It was a simple school notebook, the kind that costs $3 at the stationery store. Richard opened it to the first page, and his irritation turned into surprise. Monday, March 15th. Peter woke up at 6:45 a.m., seemed to have slept well, ate 2 whole pancakes for breakfast. At school, the teacher said he helped a classmate struggling with math. Paul slept poorly, had a nightmare, needs more attention at bedtime, ate little for dinner last night, maybe tried different fruits. Richard flipped through the pages. There were detailed notes about each day. For the past 3 months, food preferences, sleep schedules, academic progress, mood changes, play preferences. It was a meticulous report on his children's lives, written by an employee who earned 2 minimum wages. Tuesday, March 23rd. Peter asked when his dad would play with him again. Paul said he dreams about his mom every night. Both of them felt sad at bedtime. I told extra stories and left the hallway light on. Richard stopped reading. He felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Do you note when they miss me? Mr. Anderson. I didn't mean to intrude. Mary looked visibly distressed. I know it's not my place, but the boys, they talk about you a lot. They always ask when you will arrive, if you will have time to talk to them. And what do you say? I tell them that their dad works a lot because he loves them, that your work helps many families, that it's important. But, Mary took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for something risky. But sometimes I see that they just want their dad there, sitting on the floor, playing with cars, or listening about their day at school. It doesn't have to be for long, just to be present. Mary's words echoed in the silence of the kitchen like gunshots. Richard flipped through more pages of the notebook, finding observations that revealed how Mary knew his children better than he did. Friday, April 2nd. Paul is afraid of the dark, but is embarrassed to say so. I always leave a little light on in the hallway. Peter likes to organize things by color, just like his dad. Did he inherit that? Both of them asked if they could help their dad with work when they grow up. They want to work with me. Richard looked at Mary in surprise. They talk about it all the time. They want to know what your company is like, what kind of things you sell, why you spend so much time there. I explain what I know, but... Mary hesitated again. But what? But I think they wanted to hear that from you. At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Mauricio again, certainly with more problems about the supplier crisis. But for the first time in his life, Richard let the phone ring until it stopped. Mary, can I keep this notebook for a few hours? Of course, Mr. Anderson. Just please don't get mad at the boys for anything I wrote. They are wonderful kids. They just need what? They need to feel that they are the most important thing in the world to someone. Richard went upstairs to the office, carrying the notebook and a cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. He spent the next 2 hours reading every word Mary had written about his children, discovering details about Peter and Paul that a father should know by heart. He found out that Peter had a natural talent for math, but felt insecure when he got a problem wrong, that Paul loved to draw but hid his drawings because he thought they weren't good enough, that both of them missed their mum but were afraid to say it because they didn't want to make their dad sad. He discovered that his children were incredible kids, full of personality and dreams, and that he was missing every moment of their childhood by being too busy building an empire they didn't even fully understand. When Mary left at 5 in the afternoon, Richard was still in the office, looking out the window at the backyard where his children played alone, waiting for him to come down for a family dinner, something that hadn't happened in weeks. That night, for the first time in months, Richard had dinner with Peter and Paul, and for the first time he truly listened to them. Continue 1634, Chapter 4. The block party that changed everything. 3 weeks had passed since Richard read Mary's notebook. The household routine had subtly changed. He was coming home earlier at least twice a week, having dinner with the kids more often, and even bought a board game that they played on Sunday nights. But he still struggled against years of ingrained habits and the constant pressure of business. The crisis with Electro South was far from resolved. Richard spent entire days trying to renegotiate contracts, find alternative suppliers, and calm nervous investors. Mother's Day was approaching, the most profitable date of the year for the appliance retail sector, and his stores were dangerously low on stock. It was on a rainy Thursday in May that everything changed again. Richard arrived home at 9 in the evening, exhausted after a disastrous meeting with the bank. The loans were being questioned, and he would need to provide personal guarantees that would put his own house at risk. He entered through the garage, expecting to find the mansion silent, with the kids already asleep. Instead, he was greeted by lively music coming from the backyard and the unmistakable smell of roasted corn. "What the hell?" he murmured, dropping his briefcase on the kitchen counter. Through the window, he saw a scene that looked like it came straight out of a movie about rural America. Mary had transformed the sophisticated backyard into an authentic block party. Colorful fabric banners fluttered between the palm trees. An improvised bonfire, safe, he noted with relief, burned in the center of the deck, surrounded by logs serving as benches. There were makeshift stalls with colorful sheets selling typical foods made for fun. Peter and Paul were running around the backyard, dressed as authentic country kids, plaid shirts, patched pants, straw hats, and even painted freckles on their faces with watercolor. But they weren't alone. The backyard was full of people. Richard recognized Mrs. Johnson, the doorman from the neighboring building, dancing with her teenage grandson. Carlos, the gardener who came twice a week, was playing the accordion at one of the stalls. Rosanna, the maid from the Martinelli family, the mansion next door, was teaching the kids how to make candy in a pot over a portable stove. "My God, what is this?" Richard felt a mix of panic and disbelief. There were at least 20 people in his backyard, adults, children, elderly, most clearly domestic workers from the upscale neighborhood. Everyone was laughing, dancing, eating, and having a good time, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to throw a party at a stranger's house. Richard was about to leave and put an end to that invasion when he saw something that made him stop in the middle of the kitchen. Peter was dancing with a girl of about 8, the daughter of someone he didn't know. The boy was carefully holding the girl's little hands, spinning her slowly to the sound of Ring of Fire. He had an expression of absolute concentration on his face, trying not to step on his partner's feet. Every now and then he looked at Mary, who was gesturing to guide the dance steps, Paul was at one of the booths helping Mrs. Johnson serve corn pudding from a huge pot. The boy, usually shy with strangers, was chatting animatedly with everyone who arrived, proudly offering the food like a little host. "Come try the corn pudding I helped make," he shouted to each new guest. "Aunt Mary taught the recipe from her grandmother." It was then that Mary noticed Richard standing by the kitchen window. She was wearing a colourful cotton dress, her hair down, adorned with a fabric flower, and had the flush of someone who had danced and laughed all night. For a moment their eyes met through the glass, and he saw a look of panic cross her face. Mary said something to the people around and quickly walked toward the house. Richard met her at the kitchen door, visibly nervous. "Mr. Richard, I didn't know you would arrive so early. I can explain." The words tumbled out as she nervously fidgeted with her hands. "I know I should have asked for permission first, but the kids got so excited when I told them about the block parties from my hometown, and I thought it would be educational for them to learn about our traditions and—" "Mary," Richard interrupted her, but his voice didn't come out as harshly as he intended. "How many people are outside?" "About 20, Mr. Richard. But they are all familiar faces. Mrs. Johnson has worked in the building for 15 years. Carlos takes care of your garden. Rosanna is from your neighbor's house." Mary spoke quickly, as if a detailed explanation could ease the situation. "Everyone here is honest working people, family folks. You organized all of this by yourself?" "Yes, sir. I bought everything with my money, brought the decorations from my house, borrowed some pots." Mary took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "If you want, I can ask everyone to leave right now. I know it was wrong to use your house without permission, but why did you do this?" The question caught Mary off guard. She stopped speaking and looked out the window to the yard where Peter and Paul continued playing with the other kids. "Because they have never seen a real party, Mr. Richard." Her voice became softer, more intimate. "A party where everyone knows each other, where kids play with people of all ages, where there is no difference between rich and poor, just people sharing joy." Richard followed her gaze. Peter had found a small guitar somewhere and was trying to play some chords that someone had taught him. Paul was sitting on the lap of an elderly lady Richard didn't know, listening to stories and laughing at something she had said. "At the school they attend, the parties are different, right?" Mary continued. "Everything is very nice, very organized, but I can't quite explain. It's like a show for the parents to watch, not a party for the kids to enjoy." Richard knew exactly what she was talking about. The parties at St. Patrick's were very expensive events, with gourmet buffets and professional decorations, where parents silently competed to see who had hired the most expensive photographer or who wore the most exclusive designer clothes. Did they ask to have a block party? Peter asked if in Brazil there were also parties with bonfires, like in American movies, and Paul wanted to know why we never had parties at home. Mary hesitated before continuing. "So I told them about the parties in my city, how the whole community would gather in the street, how the kids learned traditional dances, how everyone contributed something, and they wanted to recreate that here. They did. They said they wanted to meet Aunt Mary's friends, that they wanted to learn to dance, that they wanted to taste real food." Mary smiled shyly. "I tried to explain that here in Los Angeles things are different, that it's not common for neighbors to visit each other, but they insisted so much." At that moment, Peter came running toward the kitchen. "Dad, Dad, you're here!" The boy was sweaty and excited, with a painted face and clothes dirty from the ground. "Come see, I learned to dance the quadrilla, and Mrs. Rosa is teaching how to make popcorn on the stove." "Peter, son," Richard began, not quite knowing how to explain that the party needed to end. "And you know what else? Carlos brought the accordion and is playing that song you sometimes sing in the shower. You know how to play the accordion, right, Dad?" "What song do I sing in the shower?" Richard frowned. "That one by Johnny Cash. When I looked at the burning land. You sing loud, we can hear you from our room." Richard felt his face heat up. He didn't know his kids could hear him singing in the bathroom. Ring of Fire was a song his father sang when he was little. On Sunday mornings while making coffee, he had no idea he still sang it, decades later. "Come on, Dad, come dance with us." Peter tugged at his hand. "Aunt Mary said you must know how to dance because every Brazilian knows." Richard looked at Mary, who was clearly waiting for him to send everyone away. He looked at the yard where Paul was enthusiastically waving from the candy booth. He looked at his son, whose eyes were shining with anticipation. And then, for the first time in years, he made a decision that was not. What happened in the next 3 hours would forever change the way Richard viewed his life, his family, and his place in the world. Continue. 1635, Chapter 5. A Night of Revelations. What Richard thought would be a few minutes turned into one of the most revealing nights of his adult life. As he stepped into the backyard, still wearing his business suit, he felt completely out of place in the midst of that universe of spontaneous joy. People stopped talking for a few seconds, clearly surprised by the unexpected appearance of the boss. "Look who it is! The homeowner has arrived," announced Mrs. Johnson, a woman in her 60s with grey hair tied in a bun and a warm smile. "Mary, introduce us properly." Mary approached, still nervous but with a more confident posture. "Everyone, this is Mr. Richard, the boy's father. Mr. Richard, this is Mrs. Johnson, who has worked in the building next door for 15 years. Nice to meet you, Mr. Richard." Mrs. Johnson extended her hand firmly. "What lovely boys you have. Polite, smart. Mary talks about them all the time." "She does." Richard shook the woman's hand, surprised by the information. "Oh, yes, she does. She says she's never taken care of such special children, that they are curious, affectionate." Mrs. Johnson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And they ask about their father all the time. They want to know everything you do. They want to help." Before Richard could fully process this information, Carlos, the gardener, approached holding an accordion. "Mr. Richard, I'm glad you made it. The boys said you liked Johnny Cash. Is that true?" Carlos was a thin man in his 50s, with calloused hands from work and a simple demeanor that had always intimidated Richard, not out of fear, but because he didn't know how to talk to someone so different from his social circle. "I do," Richard admitted, still uncomfortable with all the attention. "Then come here. I'll play Ring of Fire and you can sing. The boys will be so proud." Before he could protest, Richard found himself in the center of a circle, with Carlos playing the first chords of the song he sang in the shower without realizing it. Peter and Paul came running and positioned themselves on either side of him, looking expectantly. "Come on, Dad, sing," whispered Peter. Richard cleared his throat, embarrassed, but began to sing. His voice, which he had trained in classical singing in his youth before fully dedicating himself to business, emerged clear and melodious. "When I looked at the burning land like a bonfire on St. John's Day." The reaction was immediate. Conversation stopped. People gathered closer, and some began to join in the music. Richard realized he was being listened to with genuine attention, not with the forced politeness of the executive parties he attended. "I asked God in heaven, oh, why such torment?" Peter and Paul sang along, off-key but enthusiastic. Looking around, Richard saw focused faces, some with tears in their eyes, others swaying to the rhythm of the music. There was something profoundly moving in that simplicity. When the music ended, there was warm applause. "What a beautiful voice you have, Mr. Richard," exclaimed Rosanna, the neighbor's housekeeper. "You should sing more often." "I didn't know you sang so well, Dad." Paul hugged him around the waist, genuinely impressed. "Why don't you sing for us at home?" asked Peter. The innocent, in question, hit Richard like a blow. Why didn't he sing at home? When had he stopped singing to his children? When had he become so serious, so distant from his own emotions? "Now that we've discovered the boss's talent," laughed Mrs. Johnson, "let's teach him to dance. Mary, come here." "Oh, no." Mary shook her head, clearly embarrassed. "Mr. Richard doesn't need to." "Of course he does," intervened Carlos, already playing a lively waltz on the accordion. "Every American should know how to dance. It's the law." The children began to clap and shout, "Dance, Dad, dance!" Mary approached timidly, extending her hand. "You don't have to feel obligated." But Richard had already made a decision. He took her hand, feeling for the first time how delicate and hard-working they were at the same time. Hands that cared for his children every day. "Teach me," he said simply. What followed was an improvised lesson in dancing in the middle of the backyard, with Peter and Paul laughing every time their father stepped on Mary's foot, Mrs. Johnson shouting instructions, "No, Mr. Richard, left foot first," and Carlos playing slower to make it easier to learn. Gradually, Richard began to find the rhythm. Mary was a patient teacher, guiding his movements gently, laughing when he stumbled, but always encouraging him to continue. In 10 minutes, they were dancing almost in sync. "Now that's it," shouted Mrs. Johnson. "Look how beautiful it is when we let loose." It was at that moment that Richard realized something surprising. He was having fun, genuinely having fun. It had been years since he felt that lightness, that spontaneous connection with other people. On the makeshift dance floor in the backyard, surrounded by people he barely knew, he felt more authentic than at any business meeting or high society social event. "Dad, you're happy," observed Paul, who had stopped playing just to watch his parents dancing. The innocent observation from his son made him stop dancing. Was he happy? When was the last time someone saw him genuinely happy? "Now it's time for food," announced Rosanna, calling everyone to the makeshift stalls. "Mary made the best corn pudding in Los Angeles." For the next hour, Richard tasted foods he hadn't eaten since childhood. Grilled corn, popcorn made on the stove, homemade candy, spiced cider, sitting on a log around the bonfire, listening to stories from the people who worked quietly in the neighborhood where he lived. He discovered entire lives he had never known. Mrs. Johnson had raised 5 children. After her husband died in a work accident, she was left alone. All her children graduated. One became a doctor, another an engineer. "Education," she would say, "is the only inheritance a poor person can leave for their children." Charles was originally from California. He moved to Los Angeles in the 1990s in search of opportunities. He had built his own house in the outskirts, brick by brick on weekends. He had a vegetable garden in the backyard, where he grew greens that he shared with the neighbors. Rose had quit her job at a factory to care for her sick mother. She worked as a housekeeper because the flexible hours allowed her to take her mother to the doctors when necessary. She dreamed of opening a small cafe in the neighborhood where she grew up. Each story was a universe of dreams, struggles, and dignity that Richard had never considered. These people passed through his life daily, mowing his lawn, cleaning his building, taking care of the neighbors' homes, but he had never truly seen them. "And you, Mr. Richard?" asked Mrs. Johnson. "How does a successful businessman decide to join a block party in his backyard?" The question caught Richard off guard. How could he explain that he was discovering a version of himself he had lost years ago? How to say that his children seemed happier that night than they had in months of expensive entertainment? Richard looked at Peter and Paul, who were sitting on the floor listening to Charles tell stories about his hometown. "I think I needed to remember what it's like to truly live." Mary, who was sitting next to him, looked at him in surprise. "Work takes up so much time," Richard continued, surprised by his own honesty. "Sometimes we get so busy building a life that we forget to live it." "But you build important things," Mary said softly. "Your company provides jobs for many people, helps families. That's true, but Richard hesitated, looking at the bonfire. But sometimes I wonder if my own children know who I really am, if I know who they really are. The silence that followed was broken by Peter, who ran over. "Dad, Charles said that in his town they have a party every month. Can we have a party every month here too?" Richard laughed. "Every month might be difficult, son. But sometimes can we? Please." Looking around the backyard, the simple people who had turned his home into an authentic celebration, the genuine happiness of his children, the sense of community he had lost long ago, Richard made another impulsive decision. Sometimes, yes, the party naturally wound down around midnight. People said goodbye with warm hugs, thanking him for the hospitality and inviting Richard to visit them as well. Mrs. Johnson kissed Peter and Paul on the cheeks, making them promise they would visit her at the building's entrance. When everyone left, Richard, Mary, and the children were left alone in the backyard, surrounded by the remnants of a party that had changed everything. "That was the best party of my life," declared Paul, yawning. "And mine too," agreed Peter. Richard looked at Mary, who was picking up the last plates and cups. "Mary, I need to apologize." She looked at him in surprise. "Apologize? Why?" "For misjudging all of this, for thinking it would be a problem." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My children were happier tonight than they have been in months. And so was I." Mary smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "They deserve to be happy, Mr. Richard. They are special kids." "I know. And you—" Richard hesitated, realizing he was about to say something that would fundamentally change their relationship. "You have a gift that I didn't recognize before." That night, after helping to clean the backyard and putting the children to bed, Richard stayed up late thinking. The company was still in crisis. Financial problems persisted, and his ex-wife still threatened to fight for custody of the children. But for the first time in years, he felt like he might be finding his way back home. Chapter 6. The Proposal That Changed Lives. 2 weeks after the block party, life in the mansion had found a new rhythm. Richard arrived earlier whenever possible, not just to have dinner with the children, but to participate in the small rituals that Mary had created. Story time, homework turned into games, conversations about the day during afternoon snacks. It was as if the house had gained a soul that he hadn't realized was missing, but the outside world continued to crumble around him. On the morning of Monday, June 7th, Richard was in the office of Electro USA when Mauricio burst in, panicked. "Richard, we need to talk, now!" Mauricio closed the door behind him, his face paler than usual. "The situation has become unsustainable." The company's office occupied the 12th floor of a commercial building in Santa Monica. From the window, Richard could see the frantic movement of the city. Cars, people, money circulating in an endless dance of ambition and survival. He had built that empire by 30, transforming a small shop inherited from his father into a chain of 17 establishments. Now, at 42, he was watching it all crumble. "The bank cancelled the line of credit," Mauricio announced, throwing a folder on the table. "Without the delivery from Electro South, we've lost 40% of our projected revenue for the quarter. Suppliers are demanding payment up front. And there's more." "What more?" Richard massaged his temples, feeling a headache forming. "Patricia filed for custody in Miami. Her lawyer claims you are neglecting the children due to overwork." Richard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What do you mean? She hasn't even called the boys in 2 weeks." "Apparently, she has evidence that you leave the children alone with unqualified personnel." Mauricio read the document with discomfort, "and that it's facing financial difficulties that could jeopardize their well-being." "Unqualified staff." Richard repeated the words bitterly. "She's talking about Mary." "I presume so. Richard, you need to make a decision. Either resolve the company crisis or fix the family situation. At this rate, you're going to lose both. The next few hours passed in a haze of emergency meetings, calls to lawyers, and analyses of catastrophic scenarios. By 6 in the evening, Richard was mentally exhausted and desperately needed an honest conversation with someone he trusted. He returned home to find the family routine that had become his only refuge. Mary was in the kitchen, helping Peter with math, while Paul was drawing at the breakfast table. The smell of beans cooking on the stove created a homey atmosphere that dramatically contrasted with the chaos of his professional life. "Dad!" The boys ran to hug him as they always did, but that night Richard held onto his children's embrace as if it were an anchor. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to sound normal. "Peter got an A on his math test," Paul announced proudly, "and I learned how to spell responsibility." Responsibility. Richard smiled for the first time that day. "That's a tough one. Aunt Mary taught me. She said responsibility is when we take care of the people we love, even when it's hard." The child's definition hit Richard like an arrow. Responsibility was caring for those you love, even when it's difficult. That was exactly what he needed to do. "Boys," Richard said, kneeling to be at their level, "can you go play for a bit? I need to talk to Aunt Mary about something important." When the kids went upstairs to their room, Richard sat at the kitchen counter and watched Mary finish preparing dinner. She had sensed something was wrong. Mary always sensed everything, but waited for him to speak first. "Mary, I need to tell you something," Richard began, "and then I need to make you a proposal." She stopped stirring the pot and turned to him, concerned. "The company is going through a serious crisis. I might lose a lot of money, maybe even the house." Richard paused, organizing his thoughts. "And Patricia is trying to get custody of the kids. She claims I can't take care of them properly." Mary paled. "Because of me? Because I don't have a diploma, I don't have a college degree? No, Mary, because of my negligence." Richard sighed deeply. "And you know what's more ironic? Since you came here, Peter and Paul have never been so well taken care of. They've never been so happy." "Mr. Richard, let me finish." He stood up and began to pace the kitchen. "I spent years hiring expensive nannies, private tutors, child psychologists. I spent a fortune trying to give my children the best, but it was just a simple woman from Texas showing up here that they discovered what it really means to be a child." Mary was silent, but tears began to form in her eyes. "You know my children better than I do. You jot down every detail of their lives in a notebook you bought with your own money. You turn homework into play, teach moral values through stories, bring joy to a home that was dead inside. I just do my job." "No, Mary, you don't just do your job. You love my children as if they were your own, and they love you too." The silence in the kitchen was broken only by the sound of the beans bubbling on the stove. "I want to make you a proposal," Richard finally said. "I want you to accept the position of official caretaker for the children. Salary 3 times what you currently earn, your own room in the house, health benefits." Mary interrupted him with a gesture of her hand. "Mr. Richard, that's very generous, but there's more," he continued. "You told me you have a teenage daughter living with your mother in the countryside. I want her to come to Los Angeles, too. I'll pay for private school, tutoring, college if she wants. She can live here, study here, have the opportunities she deserves." Mary leaned against the sink, clearly shocked by the proposal. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice choked. "Because I finally understood one thing, Mary." Richard stopped in front of her, looking into her eyes. "My children don't need more money, more expensive toys, more extra classes. They need someone who truly sees them, who truly cares, who is truly present. And that person is you." "But what if you lose the company? What if you can't pay for all this?" "Then we'll manage however." "We can. But Peter and Paul will at least have one thing guaranteed. They'll grow up in a house full of true love." Mary remained silent for long minutes, wiping her tears with her hand. "My daughter Sophie is 16, she finally said. "She's very smart, studies at a public school in Springfield, but dreams of studying engineering. She's always been at the top of her class. Then let's make her dream come true. Mr. Richard, if I accept this, if I bring my daughter, if I take on all this responsibility," Mary looked at him seriously, "you need to understand that this isn't just a job for me. These boys will become my family too, and when someone becomes family, we never abandon them, no matter what happens." "That's exactly what I want, Mary. That's exactly what my children need." That night, after Mary accepted the proposal and called Springfield to give the news to her daughter, Richard went upstairs to put Peter and Paul to bed. It was a ritual he had started participating in since the block party. "Dad, is it true that Aunt Mary's daughter is coming to live here?" Peter asked as Richard tucked in the blanket. "Yes, it's true. How did you find out?" "We overheard you talking." "Are we going to have an older sister?" Paul asked. Richard smiled. "Something like that. Are you happy?" "Very!" both shouted in unison. "And Dad?" Peter said more seriously. "If the company has problems, if we go broke, will Aunt Mary and Sophie still live here?" The question showed a maturity that surprised Richard. "Why do you ask that?" "Because we don't want to lose our family again," Paul replied simply. Richard sat on the bed between his two sons, his heart tightened by the honesty of the children. "You won't lose it, I promise." "Do you really promise?" Peter insisted. "I promise. You never lose a true family." 2 weeks later, on a sunny June morning, Richard was at Los Angeles International Airport, waiting for the arrival of Sophia Smith, a 16-year-old girl he didn't know, but who was about to become an integral part of his life. The decision to expand his non-traditional family during a financial crisis was, by business standards, completely irrational. But Richard had learned something fundamental in the past weeks. The best decisions in life rarely make sense on spreadsheets. When Sophia stepped off the plane, a tall young woman with the same expressive eyes as her mother and a shy demeanor as if she were stepping into a new world, Richard felt he was taking the first step on a journey that would change all of them forever. "Welcome to your new home," he said, extending his hand to the girl who trembled with nerves and anticipation. What he didn't expect was that Sophia would bring with her not only dreams and hopes, but also a worldview that would force Richard to question everything he thought he knew about success, family, and the true meaning of wealth. Chapter 7. Mary's Secret. Sophia arrived on a Sunday in July, carrying only a small suitcase and a worn notebook that she hugged to her chest as if it were a treasure. At 16, she was the height of her mother, but had a posture that oscillated between the shyness of someone who grew up in the countryside and the determination of someone who always knew she would have to fight for her dreams. Her long, straight hair was tied in a simple ponytail, and she wore a light blue shirt that Aunt Mary had mailed specifically for the trip. "Mom!" The first word out of Sophia's mouth was a shout of joy upon spotting Mary waiting in the arrivals area. Mother and daughter embraced with an intensity that made Richard understand, viscerally, the sacrifice Mary had made in the last 2 years, living away from her daughter. "My princess," Mary whispered, running her hands through Sophia's hair, as if she needed to make sure she was really there. "How you've grown, my daughter." Peter and Paul, who had insisted on accompanying Richard to the airport, watched the scene with respectful curiosity. "Is that Sophia?" Peter asked quietly. "Yes, it is," Richard replied. "How about we greet our new sister?" The word sister made Sophia look at Richard in surprise. Mary had explained the situation over the phone, but it still seemed unreal to the girl that a businessman from Los Angeles would want to welcome her as family. "Hi, Sophia," Paul said shyly. "I'm Paul, and this is my brother Peter. Aunt Mary, your mum, talked a lot about you." Sophia knelt to be at the children's height, revealing a sweet smile that lit up her entire face. "Hi, boys, Mom. Talks about you all the time. She said you are the smartest and most polite boys in Los Angeles." "That's a lie," Peter laughed. "We get into trouble sometimes." "Trouble is good," Sophia replied. "It means you know how to have fun." During the ride home, Richard watched through the rearview mirror as the twins bombarded Sophia with questions about Texas, her school, and her musical tastes. There was a naturalness in the way she interacted with the children that reminded him of Mary, a capacity to be present, to truly listen, to turn simple questions into meaningful conversations. "Sophia," Richard said when they stopped at the first traffic light, "your mom told me you want to study engineering." "Yes, sir." Her voice became more serious, more formal. "I want to study environmental engineering. There are many problems with water and waste in Springfield. I want to learn how to solve those problems." "What kind of problems?" Richard was genuinely curious. "The city's reservoir has dried up twice in the last 5 years due to drought and waste. Some neighborhoods go days without water, while others have water overflowing, and the landfill is next to a creek that flows into the Colorado River." Sophia spoke passionately, gesturing with her hands. "If I can graduate, I want to go back there and help the city council create a sustainable master plan." Richard was impressed by the girl's maturity and sense of social responsibility. "And do you already know which university you want to attend?" "I dream of UCLA or Stanford, but I know it's difficult. The school in Springfield is good, but it's not like the private schools here in Los Angeles." "Then let's work to get you there," Richard said firmly. "I'll enroll you in a private school here with tutoring, if necessary, and a preparatory course." Sophia was silent for a few seconds, clearly moved. "I'll pay it all back when I graduate," she finally said. "I promise." "Sophia," Richard stopped the car at a new traffic light and turned to look at her. "Family doesn't charge family. What I'm doing for you, you'll do for others when you have the opportunity. That's how the world gets better." When they arrived at the mansion, Richard noticed how much his home had changed in the last few months. What was once a cold and impersonal space now breathed life and warmth. Mary had prepared the guest room that had previously been just a storage space. Richard transformed it into a cozy suite with 2 beds, one for her and another for Sophie. "Wow, what a big house!" Sophie exclaimed, looking at the garden, the pool, and the outdoor kitchen. "It's like one of those magazine houses." "It was a magazine house indeed," Richard said with irony. "Beautiful, but empty. You all brought soul to it." During dinner, Sophie's first meal as part of the family, Richard observed something extraordinary happen. The girl, who had arrived shy and out of place, quickly found her place in the family dynamic. She helped Peter with difficult words, laughed at Paul's jokes, and told funny stories about her school in Springfield. But it was on Monday, when Sophie accompanied the twins to school to learn about their routine, that Richard discovered something about Mary that would completely change his perception of the woman who cared for his children. Richard had decided to work from home that morning, a decision becoming more frequent as the company's crisis worsened, and he realized his presence was more needed at home than in the office. He was in the home office when he heard voices coming from the living room. "Mom, are you sure you don't want to tell me?" It was Sophie's voice, low but insistent. "Tell you what, my daughter," Mary replied with an evasive tone Richard had never heard from her. "About your degree, about why you work as a housekeeper when you have a higher education." Richard felt his heart race. "Degree? What degree?" "Sophie, that's not important right now." "Of course it is important. Mom, I know you studied. Grandma told me you graduated in education from the University of Texas. Why have you never told Mr. Richard this?" There was a long silence. Richard discreetly approached the door, trying to listen better. "Because he never asked," Mary finally said, with a sadness that cut Richard's heart. "And when I got here, needing work urgently, I realized that if I said I had a degree, he would think I wanted to earn a lot and wouldn't hire me." "But Mom, Sophie, you don't understand how things work here in Los Angeles. People look at a poor woman from the South and already decide what she can or cannot do. If I had come saying I was a qualified educator, they would have thought I was considering myself superior to other candidates. And so you pretended to be just a housekeeper." "I didn't pretend, my daughter. I am a housekeeper. The degree doesn't pay bills, doesn't put food on the table, and taking care of a home, taking care of children, is just as dignified a job as any other." "But you could be teaching, working in education." Mary let out a bitter laugh. "Do you think it's easy to get a teaching job here in Los Angeles, without connections, without contacts, with a Southern accent?" "I tried, Sophie. I sent my resume to 40 schools. Do you know how many called me for an interview? 2. And in both, they told me I didn't have the profile they were looking for." Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Mary was a qualified educator. A qualified educator he had hired to clean floors because she was afraid to reveal her qualifications. "But now it's different, Mum. Mr. Richard seems to be a good person. He brought you to live here. He brought me to study. Yes, he is a good person, better than I thought he would be at first. But Sophie," Mary paused, "sometimes people are good, but still can't see beyond their own prejudices, and I can't risk our stability. Are you afraid to tell him? I'm afraid he will feel deceived, afraid he will think I lied, that I played the victim, afraid he will realize that I always knew how to take care of the boys, not by instinct but by professional training." Richard stepped away from the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He went upstairs to the office and stared out the window without seeing anything, processing what he had heard. Mary was an educator, a qualified educator who had submitted to work as a housekeeper because society, because he himself, could not see beyond her Southern origin, her social class, the ingrained prejudices. He remembered all the times he had been surprised by Mary's natural intuition in dealing with the children. The way she turned homework into educational games, how she taught English through songs, how she observed and noted every detail of the boys' development. It wasn't intuition, it was professional knowledge applied with love. Around noon, Mary came upstairs to announce that lunch was ready. Richard looked at her with completely new eyes, the confident movements, the dignified posture, the intelligence that had always been there, but that he had interpreted as natural talent because it was more comfortable than recognizing that he had completely underestimated a woman with a degree in education. "Mary," he said before she went downstairs, "I need to ask you something." She turned, clearly sensing something different in his tone. "Why have you never told me you have a higher education?" Mary's face instantly paled. She looked at the door, as if calculating the possibility of escaping, then back at Richard. "Sir, how did you know?" "It doesn't matter how I found out. What matters is why you hid it." Mary took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and faced Richard with a dignity he should have recognized from the first day. "Because you wouldn't have hired me if you knew." The brutal honesty of the answer left Richard speechless. And the worst part was that she was probably right. Continue 1642 to Chapter 8, Confrontations and Revelations. The silence that followed Mary's confession was one of the most uncomfortable of Richard's life. He found himself forced to confront a truth he had preferred to ignore. His own prejudices had almost prevented him from knowing one of the most qualified and dedicated people he had ever met. "You are right," he finally said, sitting heavily, and Richard sat in his office chair. I probably wouldn't have hired a qualified educator to work as a housekeeper. I would have thought it was temporary, that you would leave as soon as you found something better. And I would leave? Mary interrupted him with a direct question that caught him off guard. Richard looked her in the eyes, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since they met. He now saw a 35-year-old woman who had sacrificed her professional career to provide for her daughter, who had hidden her education to find work, who had quietly applied academic knowledge in caring for her children. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. 3 months ago, I would have said yes. Today, I hope not. "Mr. Anderson," Mary stepped closer but maintained a respectful distance. "You need to understand one thing. I didn't lie to you. I really work as a housekeeper. I really clean houses. I really take care of children. The degree doesn't make this work any less dignified. I know that. Do you really?" There was a new firmness in Mary's voice, as if the revelation of her secret had released something she had been holding back for months. "Because since I got here, you always seemed surprised when I did something you considered too smart for a housekeeper." The observation hit Richard like a slap. It was true. How many times had he been surprised by Mary's educational intuition, as if it were impossible that a poor woman from the South could have formal knowledge about child development? "You're right," he said, running a hand through his hair. "And I apologize, sincerely." Mary watched him for a few seconds, as if assessing the sincerity of his apology. "You don't need to apologize, Mr. Anderson. You're not different from most people. But now that you know the truth, I need to know. Does this change anything?" "It changes everything," Richard replied immediately. "It changes because now I understand that my children are not just being well cared for. They are being educated by a qualified professional who loves them as if they were her own." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Through the window, Richard saw a taxi parked in front of the mansion and an elegant female figure getting out of the vehicle. His stomach dropped when he recognized the platinum blonde hair and aristocratic posture. "Patricia," he murmured. Mary followed his gaze and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Your ex-wife?" "The ex-wife who is trying to gain custody of the children." Richard stood up, trying to control the panic that was forming. "Mary, she can't know about our conversation, and please keep Sophie away from her." "Why?" "Because she will use anything against me. If she finds out you have a higher education, she will claim that I'm pretending to hire housekeepers when I'm actually hiring teachers illegally. If she knows about Sophie, she will say that I've turned the house into a shelter for minors." The doorbell rang again, more insistently. "Where are Peter and Paul?" Richard asked. "Still at school. They won't be back until 4. "Thank God." Richard rushed down the stairs, Mary behind him. "Answer the door as if it's a normal day. You are the children's governess, nothing more." Patricia Anderson was even, more elegant than Richard remembered. At 38, she religiously invested in aesthetic treatments that kept her looking like a woman in her 30s. She wore a light pink Chanel suit, red Louboutin shoes, and a Hermes bag that cost more than Mary's annual salary. Her blonde hair was impeccably styled, and she exuded the French perfume she had always worn, Chanel No. 5. "Richard," she said with a frosty smile as she saw him open the door. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. I'm passing through Los Angeles and decided to see how my children are." "Your children are at school," Richard replied, trying to keep his voice neutral, "as they always are at this time." "Of course. May I come in? I'd like to see how the house is doing." It wasn't exactly a request. Patricia walked past him as if she were still the owner of the mansion, her high heels echoing on the marble of the entryway. "The house is different," she observed, looking around with a critical eye. "More, how can I say, homey?" Richard followed her gaze. Patricia was right. The house was different. There were children's drawings stuck to the refrigerator, books scattered around. The living room, a basket of toys in the corner of the living room. The minimalist and cold decor had given way to an environment that truly felt inhabited by a family. "The children live here," Richard said simply. "The house should look lived in." Patricia walked into the living room, touching the furniture as if she were conducting an inspection. "And where is the famous governess I've heard so much about?" As if summoned, Mary appeared in the living room carrying a tray with coffee and water. "Good afternoon," Mary said politely, placing the tray on the coffee table. "Can I serve you anything?" Patricia examined her from head to toe with the predatory gaze Richard knew well. It was the same way she scrutinized other women at social gatherings, looking for weaknesses or reasons to feel superior. "You must be Mary," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've heard a lot about you." "I hope it's all good," Mary replied, maintaining a respectful but dignified posture. "Oh yes, from what I understand you have a special closeness with my children." The way Patricia pronounced the word closeness carried a venomous insinuation that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. "I care for them with great affection," Mary said simply. "I imagine. And I've been told you have a teenage daughter living here as well." Richard felt the danger in the question. "Patricia, it's just curiosity, Richard. After all, it's my children who are living with this extended family." "My daughter is studying at a private school here in Los Angeles," Mary replied, ignoring the provocation. "She's a well-educated and responsible girl." "I'm sure she is." Patricia gracefully sat down. Mary sat on the couch, legs crossed in a calculated manner. "And tell me, Mary, what exactly is your training for taking care of children?" The question echoed in the silence of the room like a gunshot. Richard saw Mary hesitate for a fraction of a second, and he knew she was deciding at that moment between the truth and safety. "I have practical experience, ma'am," Mary finally said, "and a lot of love for the kids." "Practical experience?" Patricia repeated the words with disdain. "How interesting. Richard has always been so demanding about academic credentials. I remember when he dismissed that English nanny because her certificate wasn't recognized by the American education system." Richard remembered the episode perfectly. He had been extremely strict in hiring the previous nanny, requiring references, background checks, and first aid course certificates. "Things have changed," he said, trying to end the subject. "I imagine so." Patricia stood up and walked to the window overlooking the backyard. "I see the landscaping has changed too. It looks more wild." Richard followed her gaze. Mary had planted a small garden in one corner of the yard where she grew herbs and vegetables with the help of the kids. There was also a sand area where Peter and Paul played and some toys scattered across the lawn. "The kids like to play outside," Richard explained. "Of course, very rustic." Patricia turned back to Mary. "And tell me, Mary, don't you feel a bit overwhelmed taking care of 3 kids practically on your own? Because I imagine Richard still works as much as he always has." "Mr. Richard has been spending more time at home lately," Mary replied loyally. "Really?" Patricia looked at Richard with genuine surprise. What an interesting change. Problems at work? The question was posed with false concern, but Richard sensed the trap. Any admission of financial difficulties would be used against him in the custody battle. "Just reorganizing priorities," he said. "Priorities?" Patricia murmured thoughtfully. "Well, I hope these new priorities include the emotional well-being of the children, because I've been worried about them lately." "Worried how?" The irritation in Richard's voice was evident. "Well, Richard, you have to admit this is not an ideal situation. Two small children being raised by a housekeeper without formal qualifications, living with strange teenagers in an environment where the boundaries between family and staff are completely blurred. Mary stepped forward, and for the first time since Richard had known her, her posture showed controlled anger. "Mrs. Patricia," she said, pronouncing the name with a cold formality, "I can assure you that Peter and Paul are very well cared for. They are happy, healthy, well-fed, and loved children." "Loved?" Patricia repeated the word as if it were something suspicious. "By a housekeeper, by someone who truly knows them, who knows that Peter likes to organize his toys by color, that Paul is afraid of the dark but doesn't like to admit it, that both of them miss you but are afraid to say so because they don't want to make their dad sad." The silence that followed was tense. Patricia looked at Mary with a mix of surprise and barely concealed anger. "How dare you?" she began. "I dare," Mary interrupted, "because it is my job to know these children. It is my job to care for them when they have nightmares, to comfort them when they feel homesick, to encourage them when they are scared. It is my job to be present." The word present echoed in the room with the weight of an accusation. Everyone knew that presence was exactly what Patricia had never offered her children. "Richard," Patricia said, turning to him with fiery eyes, "I think your housekeeper has forgotten her place." "Her place," Richard said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice, "is taking care of my children, and she does it better than anyone I have ever known." The battle was just beginning. Continue 1644. Chapter 9. The Final Decision. The confrontation between Patricia and Mary had left the air in the room thick with tension. Patricia scanned the house with the calculating gaze of someone mentally cataloguing every detail to use later as evidence. Richard recognized that expression. It was the same one she wore when planning her cruelest moves during the divorce. "I need to use the bathroom," Patricia announced, but instead of going to the guest bathroom, she headed upstairs toward the children's rooms. "Patricia, you know the house. The guest bathroom is—" Richard tried to intercept her. "I want to see the children's rooms, Richard. I have that right." Her voice had taken on the imperious tone he knew well, a mix of authority and veiled threat. Richard followed her upstairs with Mary trailing behind, sensing that something dangerous was about to happen. Patricia pushed open the door to the twins' room and stopped in the doorway, scanning every inch of the space. The room was organized, but clearly lived in. There were books scattered on the beds, colorful drawings on the walls, and folded clothes on the chairs. On the study desk, open notebooks showed completed and well-done homework. On a low shelf, toys coexisted harmoniously with educational and storybooks. "Interesting," Patricia murmured, walking over to the study desk. "I see you're doing homework at home now." She flipped through one of Peter's math notebooks, where each exercise was neatly solved and accompanied by small drawings in the margins, flowers, cars, stars, that turned the school task into a pleasurable activity. "The kids do their homework every day," Mary said, trying to keep her voice neutral, "always with supervision." "Supervision from whom?" Patricia turned abruptly. "Do you have a degree in education? Do you know the teaching method of the school? Can you identify learning difficulties?" Mary hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough time for Richard to realize she was struggling between revealing the truth and keeping the secret she had held for months. "I supervise with care and dedication," she finally replied. "Care doesn't replace professional competence," Patricia retorted with disdain. She opened the children's closet, inspecting their clothes, as if she were an auditor. "And I see that the clothing style has also changed." Richard looked at the wardrobe. The expensive designer clothes that Patricia always insisted on buying were still there, but they had been complemented by simpler and more practical pieces: colorful t-shirts, comfortable shorts, sneakers for playing outside. "They need clothes to play in," Richard said. Playing outside, apparently. Patricia picked up a t-shirt of Peter's that had a small stain of paint. When was the last time these kids attended a social event appropriate for their class? When did they go to the club? When did they participate in refined cultural activities? The question hit Richard like a dagger because he knew Patricia was using his own words against him. For years, he had criticized his ex-wife for turning their children into little adults, dragging them to boring social events just to showcase them as accessories. They go to school, play, study. They are happy, Richard said firmly. Happy? Patricia laughed bitterly. Richard, do you think happiness is letting 5-year-olds play in the mud with the housekeeper's children? I think happiness is letting kids be kids, he replied, surprising himself with his own conviction. Patricia left the twins' room and headed down the hallway to the guest room that Richard had turned into a small office. But upon pushing the door, she found something unexpected. Sophie was sitting on the bed, surrounded by math and physics books, studying with impressive concentration. The girl looked up when she heard the door open, visibly startled by the unexpected entrance of a stylish stranger. Sorry, Sophie said, starting to gather the books. I didn't know someone was going to use the room. And who are you? Patricia asked with a dangerous interest. Sophie, Maria's daughter. The girl stood up respectfully, but there was a natural dignity in her posture that caught the attention of everyone present. Patricia examined Sophie the same way she had examined Maria, looking for flaws, seeking ammunition for her arguments, but what she saw was a 16-year-old girl, simply dressed but in clean and well-kept clothes, studying advanced math materials on a Saturday afternoon. And where do you study? Patricia asked. I'm starting at Positive Academy on Monday, Sophie replied. I'm studying to catch up with the curriculum here in Los Angeles. Private school. Patricia looked significantly at Richard. Interesting investment. Investing in education is always worthwhile, Richard said, staring defiantly at his ex-wife. Even when they aren't your biological children? The silence that followed was charged with tension. Sophie looked confused from one person to another, clearly not understanding the undercurrents of the conversation. Sophie, Maria said gently, can you go downstairs and prepare a snack? The boys will be home from school soon. When Sophie left the room, Patricia turned to Richard with a victorious smile. Now I understand the bigger picture, she said. You didn't hire a housekeeper, Richard. You informally adopted an entire family. A woman without proper qualifications and her teenage daughter are living in your house, being supported by your money, influencing the education of my children. It's not like that. Isn't it? Patricia interrupted him. Then explain how it is. Explain why you are paying for private school for the housekeeper's daughter, while your own children are being raised by someone you barely know. I know Maria very well, Richard said, realizing he was being cornered, but refusing to back down. Know her? How long has she been working here? 3 months? 4? Do you know where she really came from? Did you check her references? Did you run a background check, confirmed if she is legally allowed to be in the country? Each question was a calculated jab. Richard realized that Patricia had carefully prepared for this meeting, gathering information and planning each attack. All necessary checks were done, he lied. Were they really? Patricia pulled out some printed photographs from her phone. Because I hired a private investigator, Richard, and I found out some very interesting things about your beloved housekeeper. Richard's heart raced. Maria visibly paled. For example, Patricia continued, flipping through the photos like cards from a deck, I discovered that Maria Smith graduated with a degree in education from the University of Texas in 2010, which raises the question, why is a qualified educator working as a housekeeper. Richard felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The secret had been revealed in the worst possible way. I also found out, Patricia continued relentlessly, that she tried to work as a teacher at several schools in Los Angeles and was rejected. Which makes me question, what kind of problems must a qualified teacher have to not be able to find work? In the field. Patricia, stop! Richard tried to interrupt her, but she was clearly savoring the moment. And the most interesting thing of all, she said, putting the photos away in her phone, is that she hid her qualifications from you. What does a person hide when they want a job, Richard? Usually problematic backgrounds. Maria stepped forward, her face red with anger and humiliation. Mrs. Patricia, she said in a controlled but firm voice, I can explain exactly why I couldn't find work as a teacher in Los Angeles. Oh, please explain, Patricia said with false solicitude. Because in every interview I had, people looked at me and saw the same thing you are seeing now, a poor woman from the South who doesn't deserve the job she was seeking. How convenient to blame prejudice. It's not convenient. It's real. Maria had completely lost the respectful composure she had maintained for months. Do you want to know why I hid my qualifications? Because I learned that in Los Angeles, if you are from the South and poor, having a degree can sometimes be worse than not having one, because then they think you are too ambitious for the jobs they are willing to offer. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of children's voices coming from downstairs. Peter and Paul had home from school. "Aunt Mary, where are you?" shouted Peter's voice. Patricia smiled coldly. "Oh, how perfect. Now I can see my children and personally observe how this irregular situation has affected them." What happened in the next 20 minutes determined the fate of the entire family. The twins ran up the stairs, full of the typical energy of children just arriving home from school. Upon seeing their mother in the hallway, they stopped abruptly, joy giving way to visible confusion. "Mom," Paul said hesitantly. "Hello, my loves," said Patricia, opening her arms in a theatrical gesture. "I've missed you so much." But Peter and Paul did not rush to hug her as she had expected. Instead, they instinctively looked to Mary, seeking comfort in her familiar presence. "Come here, boys," Patricia insisted, her voice already carrying a barely concealed irritation. "Aren't you going to greet your mom?" Peter approached hesitantly and gave his mother a formal hug. Paul did the same, but both remained visibly uncomfortable. "How are you, my angels?" Patricia asked, kneeling. To be at their level. "Mama's missed you so much." "We're fine," Peter replied politely. "And how are your classes? Are you learning important things?" "We are," Paul said. "Aunt Mary teaches us a lot of cool stuff." The mention of Mary made Patricia's smile falter for a second. "That's great, my love. And tell me, do you miss your mom?" It was a cruel question to ask 5-year-olds, especially in front of everyone present. Peter and Paul exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. "We do," Peter finally said, "but Aunt Mary takes good care of us." "I'm sure she does." Patricia stood up, the mask of a loving mother slipping slightly. "But you know that children belong with their mom, right?" It was Paul who answered, with the brutal honesty that only a 5-year-old possesses. "But, Mom, you were never home even when you lived here." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia looked visibly shocked by the remark, while Richard felt a mix of pride and sadness at his son's bravery. "Paul," Patricia began. "It's true," Peter said, supporting his brother. "You were always on the phone or going out somewhere. Aunt Mary plays with us, helps with homework, tells stories, and makes delicious food," Paul added. "And she doesn't yell when we make a mess." Patricia looked at the children as if they were strangers she had encountered on the street. It was evident that she did not expect to find children who had developed their own opinions and the courage to express them. "Boys," Mary gently intervened. "How about you go change your clothes and wash your hands?" Sophie prepared a special snack. "Sophie made brownies!" Peter shouted, immediately excited. "Come on, Paul!" The two ran to their rooms, leaving the adults alone in the hallway. Patricia remained motionless for long seconds, processing what she had just witnessed. When she finally spoke, her voice was laden with cold anger. "Congratulations, Richard," she said. "You managed to alienate my children against me." "I didn't alienate anyone," Richard replied. "You alienated yourself when you decided that your new boyfriend in Miami was more important than your own children. How dare you? How do I dare?" Richard felt years of repressed anger rising to the surface. "How do you dare to show up here after months without calling the kids and pretend to be a devoted mother?" "I am there." "Mother!" "Being a mother is more than giving birth, Patricia. It's being present. It's knowing your children. It's sacrificing your own interests for their well-being. And you have never done any of that." Mary, who had witnessed the entire discussion in silence, stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but respectful. "Can I say something?" Both Richard and Patricia turned to her, surprised by the interruption. "I don't have biological children besides Sophie," Mary continued, "but in the past few months, Peter and Paul have become part of my heart. I know each of their fears, each dream, each food preference. I know that Peter organizes his toys when he's nervous, and that Paul makes up crazy stories when he's happy." She paused, looking directly at Patricia. "And I can say one thing for sure. These children need stability and love. It doesn't matter who provides that, whether it's a dad, mom, grandma, aunt, or a woman from the South who loves them as if they were her own children. What matters is that they are loved." "How dare you?" Patricia began. "I dare," Mary interrupted, "because someone needs to stand up for these children. And if fighting for them means losing my job, so be it, but I won't stay silent while someone tries to destroy the family they have finally built." At that moment, Richard made the most important decision of his life. He looked at Patricia, then at Mary, and finally found the courage he had been seeking for months. "Patricia," he said with a firmness that surprised even himself, "you can try to gain custody of the children. You can hire the best lawyers. You can use all the resources you want. But I will fight for them too, and I will fight alongside people who truly love them." He turned to Mary. "Mary Smith, educator from the University of Texas, mother of Sophie, extraordinary caregiver of my children, will you accept becoming an official part of this family?" The question caught everyone by surprise, including Mary. "Mr. Richard, not as an employee, as family. You, Sophie, Peter, Paul and me. A true family, built on love and mutual respect." The tears in Mary's eyes were the only response needed. Patricia looked from one to the other, realizing that she had lost more than a battle. She had lost any chance of winning back her children's hearts through manipulation and emotional blackmail. "You will regret this," she finally said, heading for the stairs. "No," Richard replied. "On the contrary, I think we are finally going to be happy." 6 months later, the legal battle had been resolved. Richard retained custody of the twins. Patricia obtained the right to regular visits, which she rarely exercised, and Mary had officially become the educational guardian of the twins, a position created specifically to acknowledge her training and experience. Sophie had passed the entrance exam for UCLA for environmental engineering, becoming a source of pride for the entire family. Peter and Paul, now 6 years old, were happy, secure children full of plans for the future. And Richard had discovered that true wealth was not in the numbers on his spreadsheets, but in the sound of laughter echoing through the halls of a house that had finally become a home. Electro USA had survived the crisis, smaller but more solid. And Richard had learned that success is not measured solely by revenue, but also by the ability to create a legacy of love, respect, and opportunities for the people who truly matter. A Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the confrontation with Patricia, Richard was in the backyard, watching Peter and Paul play with Sophie in the garden that Mary had expanded. The home was filled with music, laughter, and the organized chaos of a real family. Mary approached him, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "Mr. Richard," she said, offering one of the glasses, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Do you regret anything?" Richard looked around, at the happy children, at young Sophie preparing to fulfill her dreams, at the extraordinary woman who had transformed his house into a home, and smiled. "I do regret," he said. "I regret taking so long to recognize that family is not about blood or money. It's about love and presence." "And presence," Mary added, smiling, "is the most valuable thing we can give each other." As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected off the mansion's windows, the Anderson-Smith family celebrated another Sunday together, knowing they had found something rare and precious, a home built on true love. The End Continue, Chapter 10. A year and a half later, the smell of cornbread baking in the oven wafted through the mansion on a sunny December morning. It was Christmas Eve 2024, and the house that once was a cold showroom from a design magazine now breathed life in every corner. Wreaths made by the children adorned the stairs. A modest Christmas tree filled with homemade ornaments occupied the center of the living room, and sounds of laughter echoed through the halls. Richard came down the stairs at 7 in the morning, as he had done every day for over a year. At 43, he had developed wrinkles around his eyes, not from stress, but from smiling so much. He wore a navy polo shirt and jeans, a casual look that Patricia would never approve of, but perfectly reflected who he had become. A present father, a conscious businessman, and a man at peace with himself. In the kitchen, he found the scene that had become his favorite in the whole world. Mary preparing breakfast while humming a folk song, Sophie helping Peter with a math exercise at the table, and Paul trying to reach a cup from the high cabinet, determined to be independent even at his newly turned 6 years. "Good morning, family," Richard announced, and was met with a chorus of enthusiastic good mornings. "Dad, look!" Peter ran to him holding a paper. "I solved all the multiplication problems by myself." "All of them." Richard examined the sheet with theatrical exaggeration. "Impressive, and all correct. Sophie taught me a trick to memorize the 7 times table," Peter explained proudly. Sophie, now 17, had grown in confidence and beauty. She was in her 2nd semester of environmental engineering at UCLA on a full scholarship earned through her own dedication. Her long hair was tied in a messy bun, and she wore a simple yet elegant top, a reflection of how she had learned to navigate between 2 worlds without losing her essence. "The trick works, Dad," Sophie said, smiling. "It's the same one I use for the more complex equations in college." "And I learned to make coffee," announced Paul, climbing onto a stool to reach the coffee maker. "Aunt Mary taught me." "Wow, what an independent son I have." Richard picked Paul up and gave him a loud kiss on the cheek, eliciting laughter from the boy. Mary watched the scene with the serene smile of someone who sees a dream coming true every day. At 36, she had found not just a job, but a vocation that combined her academic knowledge with her natural love for children. She wore a simple floral dress and had her hair down, small changes that reflected how she had gained the confidence to truly be herself. "Mr. Richard," she said, serving coffee in a cup that Peter had painted especially for him in pottery class. "A letter arrived yesterday that might interest you." The correspondence was from St. Patrick's School. Richard opened it, expecting some routine communication about school activities, but found something completely different. "It's an invitation," he announced, frowning, "for me to give a lecture during their educational week about holistic education and family involvement." "A lecture?" Sophie looked curious. "About what, exactly?" Richard reread the letter. "It seems someone mentioned our unique educational methodology. They want me to talk about how we've achieved such positive results with Peter and Paul." It was true. In the last 2 semesters, the twins had excelled not only academically, but especially in socio-emotional aspects. Their teachers constantly praised their emotional maturity, empathy with classmates from different backgrounds, and the genuine curiosity they demonstrated in all activities. "Are you going to accept?" Mary asked. "I don't know. I'm not an educator. You all do the real educational work." "Mr. Richard," Sophie said, placing her hand affectionately on his arm, "you are—" "Yes, an educator. Perhaps the most important of all of us." "What do you mean?" "You teach us every day that family is built with presence, that true wealth is love, that people are more important than profits." Sophie paused, choosing her words carefully. "You transformed a house into a home, a boss into a father, employees into family. Isn't that education?" Sophie's observation touched Richard deeply. He looked around the kitchen, at the drawings stuck to the refrigerator, at the garden visible through the window that the children tended to religiously, at the books scattered on the table mixing school lessons with adventure stories. "Maybe I will accept," he finally said, "but with one condition: you 3 come with me, because this story isn't mine alone." That afternoon, while the children played in the pool under Sophie's supervision, Richard and Mary sat in the gazebo to discuss something he had been thinking about for weeks. "Mary, I need to tell you something," he began, watching Peter and Paul invent a complex game involving math, swimming, and a lot of creativity. "Go ahead." "I've been thinking a lot about Electro USA, about the future of the company, about what kind of legacy I want to leave." Mary watched him attentively. In recent months, she had noticed that Richard seemed to be nurturing some important idea. "I want to turn the company into a cooperative," he announced. "Give equity to all employees, create a permanent scholarship program for workers' children, implement environmental sustainability policies." "Is that possible?" "With planning and time, yes. I've talked to specialized lawyers, studied similar cases." Richard paused. "Sophie inspired me when she talks about environmental engineering, about wanting to solve social problems through technology. I realize that's what I want to do too. Use the resources I have to create real positive impact." Mary smiled. "And does Maurice agree?" "Maurice is terrified," Richard laughed. "He thinks I've completely lost my mind. But you know what I discovered? I no longer care about his opinion on how I should live my life. And your family, your sister." Richard grimaced. His relatives had not reacted well to the changes in his life. His sister, a socialite from high society in Los Angeles, had stopped visiting when she realized Richard would not return to normal after the divorce. "My biological family will have to accept that this is my true family now," he said, gesturing to the children in the pool. "And if they don't accept it, that's their problem." "Mr. Richard, Mary, you changed my life in a way I didn't even know was possible. Peter and Paul have become happy and secure children. Sophie is realizing dreams she didn't even know she could have. This house has truly become a home." He turned to look directly into her eyes. "And I learned that happiness has nothing to do with social status or bank balance. It has to do with waking up every day in a home full of love." Mary was silent for a few moments, watching Sophie teach a new swimming style to the twins. "Can I tell you a secret?" she finally said. "Of course. In the beginning, when I arrived here, I was very scared. Scared of not being good enough. Scared that you would discover I was just a simple woman from the countryside, trying to pretend I knew how to care for rich children. Mary, let me finish, she smiled. Over time, I realized I didn't need to pretend anything. I just needed to be myself. A mom who loves, an educator who cares, a woman who believes everyone deserves respect and opportunity. And now I know this is my true home, not because you pay me to be here, but because my heart chose to stay. At that moment, Peter came running out of the pool, dripping water across the wooden deck. "Dad! Aunt Mary!" he shouted excitedly. "Come see! Sophie invented a math game in the water. It's the best." Richard and Mary exchanged glances and laughed. "Let's go," Richard said, getting up. "We can't miss Professor Sophie's aquatic math lesson." That night, after the children had gone to sleep and Sophie had gone upstairs to study, Richard found himself alone in the living room for the first time in months. The house was quiet but not empty. It was the comfortable silence of a home where happy people rest after a well-lived day. He picked up a photo album that Mary had organized with moments from the last 18 months. There were photos from the block party that changed everything, from the day Sophie arrived at the airport, from the twins' birthdays, from school achievements, from pool afternoons, from family dinners. In every photo, there was one constant, genuine smiles. Not the forced smiles from old photographs with Patricia, but the natural joy of people who truly enjoy being together. The last photo in the album had been taken the week before. The 5 of them together in the garden, Richard carrying Paul on his back, Peter holding Sophie's hand, Mary beside them with an arm around each one, all laughing at some inside joke that even he couldn't remember, but at the time had seemed like the funniest thing in the world. Richard closed the album and looked around the room. On the walls, next to some expensive artwork that remained from the previous decor, were framed drawings made by the children, certificates of school achievements, photos from Sophie's high school graduation. It was an eclectic decor that mixed expensive and simple, sophisticated and homey, past and present, exactly how his life had become. His phone vibrated with a message. It was from Patricia in Miami. "Merry Christmas. To Peter and Paul, send my love." Richard sighed. Patricia kept sporadic contact with the children, sending expensive gifts on holidays and making monthly video calls that lasted no more than 10 minutes. The boys had learned to accept this distant form of love without bitterness. Yet another result of the emotional education that Mary and Sophie provided daily. He typed, Richard politely responded and went upstairs. In the hallway, he passed by the slightly open door of the twins' room and peeked inside. Peter and Paul were sound asleep, cuddled up with the stuffed animals that Mary had personally sewn. On the nightstand, a glass of water and a storybook marked the nighttime routine they had established together. They were happy children, secure and loved. They had a solid family structure, quality education, and endless opportunities ahead. But most importantly, they had learned values that no money can buy: empathy, generosity, teamwork, and respect for differences. In the next room, Sophie was studying with headphones on, surrounded by calculus books and environmental projects. At 17, she had already secured a scientific internship at the university, volunteered as a tutor for low-income youth, and maintained excellent grades every semester. More importantly, she had become a loving and present older sister to Peter and Paul, a caring daughter to Richard, and her mother's best friend. Richard gently knocked on the door. Sophie took off her headphones and smiled. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" The word Dad still moved him every time. Sophie had started calling him that naturally without anyone asking or suggesting. "Everything's great. I just wanted to say good night." "Good night, Dad, and thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For everything, for welcoming me here, for investing in my studies, for treating my mom like family." Sophie paused, but mostly for teaching me that family isn't about DNA. Richard stepped closer and kissed the forehead of the girl who had become his heart daughter. Thank you, Sophie, for teaching me that love multiplies when it's shared. Before going to bed, Richard stopped by Mary's room to wish her good night. He found her organizing the children's clothes for the next day, a caring ritual she had maintained religiously for over a year. Mary. Hi, Mr. Anderson. Stop calling me Mr. Anderson. We're family, she smiled. It's hard to break the habit after so long. Then I'll have to insist until you do. He leaned against the doorframe. I wanted to thank you. Thank you for what? I should be thanking you for everything you've done for me and Sophie. You saved my family, Mary. You saved my children from growing up in a cold, loveless home. You saved me from becoming a bitter, lonely man. We saved each other, she said softly. I was lost when I got here too. I was far from my daughter, working a job that didn't fulfill me, with no prospects for the future. And now I have a beautiful family, a job. I love my daughter studying at the best university in the country. Mary smiled. Now I have everything I've always dreamed of, but never thought was possible. That night, Richard took a long time to fall asleep. He thought about how life can change completely in 18 months when you have the courage to let your heart decide what really matters. 18 months ago, he was a successful businessman but emotionally bankrupt, living in a beautiful but empty mansion, raising children he barely knew through staff he hardly saw. Now he was a present father to 3 wonderful children, a partner to an extraordinary woman, owner of a company making a positive difference in the community, and resident of a home filled with love and joy. The transformation had begun that afternoon when he came home early and found Mary playing with his children on the floor of the room. A simple scene that changed his perception of everything: work, family, happiness, success. Sometimes Richard thought about what would have happened if he hadn't come home that day. If he had kept his usual routine, working late and arriving after the children were asleep, he probably would have never discovered the treasure that was in his own home. On Christmas morning, he woke up to Peter and Paul jumping on his bed, shouting that Santa Claus had arrived. They ran downstairs to the living room, where they found Mary and Sophie already preparing the special Christmas coffee. The gifts under the tree were a mix of bought items and handmade treasures. Peter had made a leather wallet for Richard in a craft class. Paul had painted a family portrait in art class. Sophie had sewn an embroidered pillow for Mary with the phrase, "Best mom in the world." Mary had knitted personalized scarves for each of them. They were simple gifts, inexpensive, made with time and affection, and Richard realized they were the most valuable gifts he had ever received in his life. After opening the gifts, they had coffee together at the large kitchen table, planning the Christmas lunch they would host for some neighbors and friends from the neighborhood, a tradition that had naturally developed over the past few months. "Dad," Peter suddenly said, "are you happy?" The question caught Richard off guard. "Why do you ask that, son?" "Because before you always seemed worried, even when you smiled. Now you smile for real." "It's true," Paul agreed. "Your eyes smile along with your mouth." Richard looked around the table, at Mary preparing French toast, at Sophie helping the boys with a Christmas puzzle, at the home filled with life and activity, and felt a deep peace he hadn't experienced in years. "I'm very happy," he replied with complete sincerity. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Why?" Peter insisted, with the infinite curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Because I have you guys, because I wake up every day in a home filled with love, because I've learned that family is the most important thing there is." "And we are your family, right?" Paul asked, "even though we're not blood-related?" "You are my true family," Richard said, pulling both of them into a tight embrace. "Family of the heart." And that's the strongest of all. Sophie came over and joined the hug, followed by Mary. There, huddled in the kitchen on a sunny Christmas morning, were five. In that moment, Richard knew with absolute certainty that he had found the true meaning of life, not to build empires or accumulate wealth, but to create authentic bonds, offer opportunities to those in need, and be present in the moments that truly matter. The fortune he had always sought was not in bank accounts or real estate. It was there, in that collective embrace, in those morning laughs, in the security of knowing that no matter what happened, they would face it together. 18 months had been enough to teach Richard Anderson the most valuable lesson of his life. True love cannot be bought, but when offered generously, it returns multiplied in ways that no math can calculate. And so, on a December morning in 2024, a successful businessman discovered that his greatest achievement was not building a profitable company, but creating a home where 5 different hearts learned to beat in harmony, creating the most beautiful symphony he had ever heard, the music of a true family.